Masayuki observed from the battlements of the main keep as the Tokugawa soldiers pushed through his castle's defenses. They had by now made their way to the second bailey, despite the fierce resistance of his warriors, and the hail of bullets and arrows they were unleashing on them. Despite this, Masayuki showed no signs of worry, for this was all part of the plan. Indeed, he had kept a part of his forces from the fight to launch a counterattack. Confident that the time had come, Masayuki gave the order to the flag-bearer, who waved his banner, urging his eager warriors to charge forward. At the same time, in the distance, another group of men left the safety of their own castle, attacking the enemy at their rear. Masayuki smiled. His trap was a success. Welcome back to our 9th episode on the Sengoku Jidai and the 4th on the life of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Join us as together we will go over Ieyasu's conquest of Kai and Shinano during the Tenshō-Jingō conflict, and his first clash against the Sanada clan during the First Battle of Ueda. Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else. We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible. As soon as Ieyasu returned to the safety of Okazaki in Mikawa, he began planning his next move. The race between the Oda vassals to beat the traitorous Mitsuhide and obtain the mantle of hegemony from Nobunaga had already started. Ieyasu might have initially pondered gathering his forces and marching them against the Akechi, but he probably sensed that he didn't have enough time to do this, especially since some of Nobunaga's generals were already leading their armies on the field and could thus turn against Mitsuhide's forces immediately. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was at that time embroiled in a bloody campaign against the Mori in western Honshu, did just that, force-marching his troops all the way to Kyoto and defeating Mitsuhide at Yamazaki in just 2 weeks. At the same time, Ieyasu had turned his gaze towards the east, and especially the recently conquered lands of Kai and Shinano that just a few months ago belonged to the Takeda clan. With the ultimate defeat of Katsuyori, the lands passed to Oda control. Thereafter, Nobunaga appointed Hidetaka Kawajiri to rule most of Kai, Nageyoshi Mori the majority of Shinano, and Kazumasu Takigawa the entirety of Kozuke. Ieyasu rightfully suspected that the samurai of these provinces had little loyalty for their new masters, and Nobunaga's death would provide the perfect opportunity for them to rebel against Oda rule, establish their own domains, or perhaps invite powerful neighboring clans like the Uesugi and the Hōjō to claim a slice of the pie. To prevent this from happening, Ieyasu reached out to many former Takeda vassals, amongst them Oda Nobunaga in Seku, instructing him to gather as many troops and allies as possible. After gathering around 900 warriors, Nobushige occupied Komoro Castle. On June 29th, he sent Honda Nobutoshi to Kawajiri Hidetaka to secure his cooperation as well. Hidetaka was facing an uprising in his lands at the time, so Nobutoshi told him that Ieyasu was offering safe passage through his lands in case he wanted to retreat to Mino or Kyoto. This was an offer which probably offended Hidetaka, who recognized that Ieyasu was eyeing Oda territory. 4 days later, Hidetaka got Nobutoshi drunk and proceeded to murder him. Ieyasu would have probably exacted his revenge on the man, but fate had other plans. On the 7th of July, Hidetaka attempted to slip out of Kai with a small group of his retainers, but he was captured by the rebels and was put to death. By that time, Kai was not only host to rebels and Oda samurai, but also to Hōjō troops. On the last day of June, Hōjō Ujimasa, having learned of Nobunaga's death at the hands of Mitsuhide, mobilized his forces and marched to claim the former Takeda lands on the pretext of preventing a Tokugawa invasion. Within 3 days, they had captured Iwedano Castle in Kai and installed Watanabe Shozemon as lord of the area. At the same time, Sanada Masayuki, who was at that time in service to the Uesugi, attacked Namata Castle, which belonged to Kazumasu Takigawa's sphere of control. Kazemasu had already defended the castle when Fujita Nobuyoshi laid siege to the 4,000-strong garrison of Numata that was commanded by Kazemasu's nephew Takigawa Matsushige. However, when Nobuyoshi had failed, Masayuki succeeded, and the castle was handed over to the Sanada. Troubles for Kazemasu were far from over, and 3 days later, Hōjō Ieyasu and Ujinao had arrived at his doorstep with around 50,000 men. Kazemasu rallied his own 18,000 and met the Hōjō army near the border between Kosuke and Musashi provinces at Kanegawa. In the first days of the conflict, the Tokugawa forces enjoyed some success in minor skirmishes, managing to capture Kanekubo and Kawai castles. On the 8th, it was time for the big showdown. Once again, the battle began favorably for the Tokugawa troops, as with only 3,000 men, Kazemasu was able to repel Ujinao's 20,000. Seeing this, Ujinori attempted to flank the Tokugawa positions with his own 10,000-strong regiment. However, his subordinate generals moved without cohesion and became easy prey for Kazemasu, who charged their lines and turned them back. For a moment, it seemed that the Tokugawa could have claimed victory at Kanegawa. However, Ujinao's men had recovered and regrouped, and, enjoying their vast numerical superiority, were able to annihilate Kazemasu's forces. As for the man himself, he managed to escape, and even secure safe passage from Masayuki, reaching Nagashima in Ise in the end. As we have already mentioned, the Hōjō were not the only major power that wanted to take over the former Takeda clan. In the north, Uesugi Kagekatsu was also making plans of his own, and Masayuki had acted in his name, though it should be noted that Masayuki was mostly acting for his own interests. Prior to the Honnō-ji incident, Kagekatsu was in a very precarious position, facing invasions from 3 Oda generals, Shibata Katsuie, Mori Nagayoshi, and Kazemasu. But Nobunaga's death had forced his generals to call back their armies, and gave Kagekatsu the opportunity to muster his own troops and move south into northern Shinano. From there, Kagekatsu captured Kaizu Castle and attacked Fukashi, the seat of Kiso Yoshimasa, who was driven away and joined the Hōjō forces. By that time, the Hōjō had largely secured Kosuke province, with Hōjō Ujikuni capturing Numata Castle and constructing another fortress near Iwabitsu to prevent Masayuki from moving to join Kagekatsu. On the 27th, Masayuki, pressed by the Hōjō troops and having served Kagekatsu for 2 long weeks, decided to jump ship and defected to Ujimasa's side. As such, the Hōjō forces headed northwest to prevent the Uesugi army from conquering the entirety of Shinano. Crossing the Usui Pass, Ujinao took Komoro Castle from Nobushige, who managed to escape and retreated to another defensive position. On the 2nd of August, the two sides met at Kawanakajima, the site where Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin had fought so many times in the past. This time, however, there would be no battle. After staring at each other menacingly, the Hōjō army turned around and headed towards the south to meet Tokugawa Ieyasu, who had invaded Kai with a great force. Diplomacy would settle the differences between the Hōjō and the Uesugi, as 2 weeks later they would reach a peace deal, by which Kagekatsu received 4 districts in northern Shinano and promised not to harass the Hōjō while they fought Ieyasu. Ieyasu had thus far tried to win to his side as many of the former Takeda vassals as possible, and his generals had been involved in some small skirmishes. Now, having received the green light from Hideyoshi at the Kyosu Conference, he marched with the goal of properly subjugating these provinces and adding them to his own domain. At the head of 8,000 men, Ieyasu himself marched straight into Kai, while another column, led by Sakai Tadetsugu and Ogasawara Nobumine, marched to Shinano. Tadetsugu's efforts were met with little success, as they faced stiff resistance from Suwa Yoritada, who held Takashima Castle long enough for Ujinao to come to his rescue. Seeing the vastly larger Hōjō force, which numbered more than 40,000 men, Tadetsugu's own 3,000 soldiers turned tail. They fled towards Shimpu Castle in Kai, which had already been occupied by Ieyasu's detachment. The pursuing Hōjō forces were unable to destroy any fleeing Tokugawa warriors thanks to the excellent rearguard action of a samurai named Okabe Masatsuna, but nonetheless they also entered Kai and set up their camp at Wakimiko. So it was that in early September, the two sides faced off in numerous skirmishes around the areas of Shinpu and Nomi castles, where the Tokugawa men had set up their defensive lines and constructed additional defenses. Despite outnumbering their opponents more than 5 to 1, the Hōjō were unable to dislodge the defenders. Hoping to break the stalemate, Ujinao sent Ujitada and Ujikatsu with 10,000 men, to make their way around Kurokoma village and attack Ieyasu's position from the rear. However, they were met by Tori Mototada, who anticipated such a maneuver. While his regiment only numbered 2,000 men, Mototada was able to soundly defeat the larger Hōjō force, killing about 300 of them. The defeat at Kurokoma and the overall stalemate at Shimpu became the turning point for Ieyasu's campaign, which had not fared that well up to that point. Their inability to beat their much smaller adversary shook the Hōjō army's prestige, and one by one, many of their allies switched to the Tokugawa side, feeling it was the safer option to bet on. Amongst them was Kiso Yoshimasa, Yoda Nobushige, and most importantly, Sanada Masayuki, who seemed to switch allegiances faster than the speed of light. To be fair, he had bent the knee to the Hōjō because they had parked an army outside his walls. Furthermore, his goal from the very start was to acquire Numata Castle, a natural stronghold that stood on the roads connecting 3 provinces. However, the Hōjō also considered it theirs by right, and would never willingly relinquish it to him. So when Ieyasu approached him, he was more than happy to switch sides, and immediately went and recaptured Numata. The Hōjō tried to reclaim the castle, but they were unable to do so. In the meantime, Yoda Nobushige had managed to reclaim Komoro Castle, and Uchiyama captured Usui Pass, before helping Masayuki block any supplies and reinforcements from making their way to Ujinao's army. The Tokugawa side was also victorious in southern Shinano, where Ogasawara Sadayoshi took Fukashi Castle with Kiso Yoshimasa, ousting Ogasawara Dosetsusai, who controlled it for the Uesugi. With the Tokugawa forces steadily claiming ground and courting clans from the northeast of the Kanto Plain, and with their supply lines cut off, the Hōjō had no option but to seek a peace deal with Ieyasu. At the ensuing conference, Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Nobunaga's second son, Oda Nobukatsu, acted as the mediators between the 2 warring clans. On the 24th of November, the 2 sides signed a treaty that awarded Ieyasu with the provinces of Shinano and Kai, while the Hōjō would keep Kosuke, with Numata Castle returned to them. Moreover, both sides would promise not to meddle in each other's affairs. In addition, Ujinao would marry Ieyasu's second daughter, Tokuhime, thus establishing familial ties between the 2 clans. Thus, the conflict between the Hōjō and the Tokugawa was brought to a satisfying end for the 2 sides. Ieyasu would continue fighting some minor independent lords who continued to resist him in Shinano, but he was otherwise in control of the provinces. However, there was a man who was not satisfied at all with the current peace treaty, and, upon reviewing the terms, it is not hard to guess who that man was. That's right, Sanada Masayuki, who was less than thrilled at having to give his hard-earned Numata Castle back to the Hōjō. Choosing not to comply with the terms the Tokugawa and the Hōjō had agreed upon, he instead began constructing a new stronghold, Ueda Castle, and prepared to go to war with them. In the following year, Ieyasu chose not to intervene in Hideyoshi's conflict with Shibata Katsuie, for the Tokugawa daimyo had to tie up loose ends in Kai and Shinano. This was perhaps a wrong move, since Hideyoshi only emerged stronger after the Battle of Shizugatake. However, in 1584, it was his time to go against the Toyotomi juggernaut, as Ieyasu supported Nobukatsu for the hegemony of the Oda clan. We will not go into detail here, since we have an entire episode dedicated to the Battle of Komaki and Nagakute. Still, for those who haven't seen it yet, the 2 clans clashed in a series of battles in Owari and Mikawa, which came to a stalemate, with Ieyasu performing better on the tactical level. This was in spite of Hideyoshi being superior in the overall strategic situation. In the end, the 2 sides reconciled, especially since Nobukatsu agreed to surrender to Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu no longer had a reason to oppose his rule. And while Ieyasu did not formally submit to Hideyoshi, that would come later in 1586. It was a silent nod from his part, acknowledging the Toyotomi authority. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because in 1585, the Tokugawa clan was once again at war. Sanada Masayuki was refusing to hand over Numata to the Hōjō, and Ujimasa was asking Ieyasu to force his vassal to act on the terms of the peace deal. In June of that year, Ieyasu advanced with his army into Kai to show Masayuki he meant business. But this only served to strengthen the latter's resolve, who decided to break his ties with the Tokugawa and once more side with the Uesugi. To that end, Masayuki sent his second son Yukimura as hostage to the Uesugi. Of course, Masayuki's defiance could not go unpunished, so Ieyasu sent Tori Mototada, Okubo Tadio, and Hiraiwa Chikayoshi with 7,000 men to capture Ueda Castle, where Masayuki had transferred his seat, and was waiting with around 1,200 men. His eldest son, Nobuyuki, was put in charge of defending the nearby Toshi Castle. Knowing that his numerical strength wasn't enough to oppose Ieyasu's troops, since Ueda had not been finished yet, Masayuki asked Uesugi Kagekatsu for assistance. However, Kagekatsu was otherwise occupied at that moment, assisting Hideyoshi with suppressing Sasa Narimasa in Echu. Consequently, he sent only a fragment of his forces, which still nevertheless posed a threat to the Tokugawa side. In addition, Masayuki ordered the construction of various traps and obstacles in the castle, and told his men to lure the Tokugawa soldiers inside Ueda. Thus, when the Tokugawa army assaulted the castle, it all went according to Masayuki's plan. Mototada's men were easily able to push past the first line of defences and make it to the second bailey. It was then that the trap was sprung, and Masayuki's men counterattacked while archers and arquebusiers unleashed devastating volleys. A fierce battle began, and with casualties mounting, the Tokugawa forces were slowly pushed back. However, the various obstacles and traps the Sanada had placed made their retreat difficult. At that time, Masayuki signaled to his son, Nobuyuki, to attack, and he assaulted the Tokugawa force on their flank, completely breaking their morale. Mototada's men were routed, leaving behind 1,300 dead, many of them drowned in the Kamikawa River. In the opposite camp, the victorious Sanada is said to have suffered only 40 casualties. The following day, the Tokugawa force attacked Mariko Castle, an underlying fortress in the area, but once again they failed. A similar fate faced a Hōjō attack on Numata Castle, which Masayuki's uncle, Yawase Noritsuna, defended. Soon after, Kagekatsu's forces arrived in the area and began skirmishing with the Tokugawa. Seeing that the situation had turned for the worse, Ieyasu ordered a temporary retreat of his troops to regroup and reorganize, even holding back a 5,000-strong regiment led by Ii Naomasa that was underway to reinforce Mototada's army. But there would be no renewed assault on Sanada's positions, as one of Ieyasu's most loyal and important vassals up to that time, Ishikawa Kazumasa, defected to the Toyotomi, which forced Ieyasu to rethink his position. Perhaps fearing another attack from Hideyoshi, he decided to abandon the campaign against the Sanada altogether. Masayuki's great victory at Ueda established him as a great tactician among the warriors of Japan. It earned him the respect of Ieyasu, who arranged to have Nobuyuki marry Honda Tadekatsu's daughter, Komatsuhime. Realizing his war with the Hōjō would probably not end as long as he held Numata, and realizing he needed a stronger protector than Kagekatsu, Masayuki approached Toyotomi Hideyoshi and pledged his allegiance to him. Hideyoshi tried to resolve the Numata issue by transferring the castle to the Hōjō in 1589. However, a new conflict would arise from that decision, one that would mark the end of the later Hōjō as rulers of Kanto, Sagami and Izu. As for Ueda, it would once again become the site of battle between the Sanada and the Tokugawa in 1600, during the preliminary stages of the Sekigahara campaign, which we will cover in our next episode. To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the links in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.